In October 2025, Russia began removing anti-tank missiles from its own combat vehicles. The reason behind this is as disturbing as it is unexpected. To understand what's happening, we need to travel to a factory 160 kilometers east of Moscow. I'm talking about Murom Teplovos in the Vladimir region, a factory that has always been involved with transportation and security. But for years, it remained practically idle, with no real activity. Until now. Open-source intelligence analysts detected something strange in the satellite images. After years of silence, the factory suddenly came back to life. And what they found inside left everyone confused. Specialized military vehicles, the so-called 9P149 Sturm S, were being systematically dismantled, not for repair, not for modernization, but to remove their weapons. Think carefully about how absurd this situation is. We're talking about a country in intense war, a country that needs all the firepower it can get. And this country is deliberately removing missiles from its own combat vehicles. The reason? Well, the answer reveals much more than just a simple tactical decision. It exposes the true state of the Russian army, its current priorities, and, even more disturbingly, its plans for the coming decades. But before we understand the reason, you need to know these vehicles. Because the difference between what they were and what they are becoming tells a complete story on its own. The Mnogotsilovoy Tyagach Legiky Bronirovany is a veteran from the Soviet era. Its full name is Mnogotsilovoy Tyagach Legiky Bronirovany. A complicated name, I know. Translated, it means light-armored multi-purpose towing vehicle. It was developed in the 1950s and entered service in the 1970s. The philosophy behind it was simple: mass production, simplicity, and versatility. That's why more than 55,000 units were built. It was the workhorse of the Soviet Army, completely amphibious. It could cross rivers and lakes at just under 6 kilometers per hour. On land, it could reach 61 kilometers per hour on roads and had a range of 500 kilometers. Its rear compartment could carry up to 11 soldiers or 2,000 kilograms of cargo. It could tow artillery weighing up to 6,500 kilograms. But there was a problem. Its greatest advantage was also its greatest weakness. The Mnogotsilovoy Tyagach Legiky Bronirovany was cheap and light because its armor was thin, very thin, only 3 to 10 millimeters of steel, with a maximum of 14 millimeters at the front of the turret. That protected against small arms and shrapnel, nothing more. It was never meant for direct combat against heavy weapons. Now, the Sturm S is a completely different story. This is a specialist, a professional tank killer. Developed in the late 1970s, it was created with a single purpose: to destroy the most modern Western tanks. The American Abrams, the German Leopard, those were its targets. The system uses the 9M114 Kokon missile, which means cocoon. It was a formidable weapon for its time. Supersonic speed of almost 1,240 kilometers per hour. Range, more than 5 kilometers, and radio-guided, which made it difficult to jam. The vehicle carried 12 missiles in an internal magazine, automatically fed to a retractable launcher, with a firing rate of 2 to 4 missiles per minute. The design was efficient. The entire rear compartment, which in the regular Mnogotsilovoy Tyagach Legiky Bronirovany would carry soldiers, was occupied by the automatic loading mechanism and the missile magazine. The small machine gun turret was replaced by a large optical tracker for the gunner. The launcher would retract into the hull when not in use, allowing the vehicle to maintain a low profile, similar to a regular Mnogotsilovoy Tyagach Legiky Bronirovany. And here's the key point of this story. why are they two completely different worlds? On one side, a versatile and cheap transport. On the other, a specialized high-value platform for anti-tank ambushes. And Russia is turning the second into the first, taking professional tank killers and downgrading them to basic armored taxis. But the way they're doing it is what really draws a lot of attention. They remove the retractable launcher, dismantle the entire auto-loading system, take out the gunner's targeting optics, and remove the armored cover from the top of the hull. That basically empties out the rear part of the vehicle, creating an open space where soldiers can sit while being transported. But then, why are they doing this? Why dismantle a specialized weapon in the middle of a war? The answer starts with devastating numbers. Since February 2022, Russia has suffered catastrophic equipment losses. Open-source analysis groups like Oryx only record losses with visual confirmation. Even so, the numbers are shocking. More than 4,190 tanks destroyed, about 8,450 armored and infantry fighting vehicles lost, 693 armored personnel carriers. And that's just what we were able to confirm with photos and videos. Among the most heavily hit vehicles are precisely those designed to transport troops. On this list are the BMPs, the infantry fighting vehicles, and also the BTRs, armored personnel carriers. These faced especially heavy losses. And what about the MTLB, which we mentioned earlier? The active fleet started the war with about 3,300 units. So far, more than 1,800 have been destroyed. That's a loss rate of 55%, more than half of the active fleet. Ukraine is inflicting a brutal price, effectively defending its territory while systematically destroying decades of Russian military buildup. Russia has managed some slow advances, but is paying for every meter gained with enormous losses of equipment and soldiers. These huge losses are only part of the story. There is something else happening on the battlefields of Ukraine, something that has fundamentally changed the rules of ground combat. Drones, specifically cheap and extremely effective drones. These small, agile drones, often equipped with anti-tank warheads, can be guided with surgical precision to target individual soldiers, trenches, and moving vehicles. They have created what military analysts call a transparent battlefield, an environment where keeping a hidden and stationary position for any period of time is exceptionally difficult. For this reason, the deadliest problem for Russian troops now is not direct combat, it's movement. Specifically, the last mile to the front line. That final stretch has become the deadliest part of the entire operation. Crossing open or contested terrain, especially that last kilometer. Getting to the assault positions has become a nightmare. Here's a brutal reality. A vehicle like the Sturm S, which needs to stop, raise its launcher, and remain exposed while the operator guides the missile to the target, would be highly vulnerable. Attack drones, loitering munitions, precision-guided artillery, all of these could detect and counterattack immediately. The advantage of the Sturm S as an ambush weapon, which relied on staying hidden and static, simply doesn't work anymore in this new kind of warfare. But it still has wheels, it still has armor. Even if it's thin, it can still move. And on the battlefield, saturated with Ukrainian drones, even minimal protection is better than nothing. It's better than going on foot. It's better than in unprotected civilian trucks. that Russia has been forced to use repeatedly. This is the fundamental change we're seeing. Historically, the Russian army prioritized strength and firepower above all else. They produced some of the heaviest tanks in the world and the most powerful missile systems. For much of the war in Ukraine, Russia focused on a brute force approach, using tanks and armored vehicles in the early stages, trying to dominate through equipment superiority. Then, there was a transition to drones and missiles to inflict most of the damage. Because of this, Russia was not very afraid of Ukraine's counterattack capability and was completely focused on its own offensive maneuvers, confident that it had the superior and devastating force, that there was nothing Ukraine could do to stop its relentless advance. But times have changed. Now, instead of increasing their offensive capabilities with anti-tank missile systems, Russian commanders prefer to make troop carriers. Because they are finding it increasingly difficult just to keep their troops alive, get them to critical positions on the front line, and mount significant offensives, all because of Ukraine's increasingly effective and deadly drone operators. In highly contested areas of the front, like the Pokrovsk sector in Donetsk, Russia has gathered a massive force. Some estimates suggest up to 110,000 troops in total, all in a desperate attempt to capture this strategic industrial city. But so far, it is failing. Despite artillery, tanks, huge squads of soldiers, and even small disguised units, they have made virtually no progress in the area. The defenders of Ukraine are still holding the line. There, Ukrainian drones regularly scour the skies, scanning the ground for any sign of life. Then, they attack their enemies, taking out one unit after another. That's why Russia has been forced to find new ways to protect its troops and help them cover long distances with relative safety. It's the only way to get significant numbers of soldiers close to cities like Pokrovsk, and probably the only way to eventually capture those cities. To do that, they need personnel carriers. And since so many have already been destroyed, they're resorting to older models, like these converted MT-LBs. This is a sign of a dramatic shift in the Kremlin's military doctrines, a shift in focus from firepower to survivability. At the tactical level, surviving and moving on the battlefield has become the main challenge, even more important than destroying the enemy. But here is where the story gets really disturbing, because everything we've seen so far could simply be classified as desperation. Catastrophic losses leading to desperate decisions, an army in collapse, improvising with what was left, right? Not exactly. In October 2025, the open-source intelligence organization Frontelligence Insight published something explosive. Leaked internal documents from Uralvagonzavod, Russia's main tank manufacturer. These documents reveal ambitious plans that extend until 2036. Yes, you heard that right. 2036. The plans show two main fronts. First, large-scale modernization of old T-72 tanks. The program plans to upgrade approximately 828 older T-72 tanks, from stock to the significantly improved T-72B3M standard. Most of these upgrades are scheduled between 2027 and 2029. The second and more significant front is a massive increase in the production of Russia's most modern tank, the T-90. The goal is to increase production by 80% by 2028 compared to 2024 levels. Introduction of a new, even more updated variant, the T-90M2. The projected total production is impressive. More than 1,700 of these tanks by 2036. We're talking about more than 2,600 new and modernized tanks in the coming decades. Now, stop and think for a moment. Do you really think these numbers are for the war in Ukraine? The answer is no. These timelines go until 2036. This production is a long-term bet. Russia is aware of its heavy losses, but is betting it can outlast the West's support for Ukraine by enduring for years. And there's more. While Russia was refurbishing these old MTLBs, it also introduced its successor. At the Army 2024 Defense Exhibition, the MGTLB was revealed, a new multi-purpose armored transport vehicle explicitly designed to replace the old Motoliga. The MGTLB also has a higher maximum speed, greater cargo and towing capacity, and an impressive operational range of 800 kilometers. And here is the final connection that brings everything together. The same Murom Teplovos factory, currently involved in the tough short-term task of dismantling Sturm S vehicles, is also being rebuilt, renovated, and expanded, probably in preparation for the future mass production of the MGTLB. A single location shows Russia's desperate gamble. On one side, we see the scrap they use to survive today. On the other, the industrial expansion being made as a bet on tomorrow. Two simultaneous strategies, because they're paying a devastating price, but they're betting they can hold out longer than Western patience. As analysts from the Institute for the Study of War and Frontelligence have noted, the planned volume of more than 2,600 new and modernized tanks is enough to fully replenish Russia's tank fleet for another large-scale war and re-establish a real threat to NATO. So, here's the disturbing truth. Russia isn't fighting one war, it's fighting two at the same time. The first is the war for survival in Ukraine, with the army, which is now using Soviet scrap metal, converting specialized weapons into basic transports, desperately improvising while suffering devastating losses. As for the second war, well, it's a long-term industrial gamble. The attempt to rebuild the army they want for the next decade while they bleed in the current one. Russia is effectively burning through its Soviet inheritance to fund today's war, accepting the massive loss of old equipment as a necessary cost, clearing out the old stock, and using this as justification for a complete cycle of modernization of its armed forces. It's absolute desperation. They're doing this because they're paying an unsustainable price and improvising with what's left. But it's also dangerous because they're learning, betting that they can endure the suffering longer, hoping that the West will get tired of supporting Ukraine. Behind today's chaos, there's a bet on the coming decades, and that bet depends on one thing. Will Western support for Ukraine remain strong or weaken first? That's what's really at stake here. Now, I want to know your opinion. Do you think this dual strategy from Russia represents a real, long-term threat? Or is it just a desperate plan doomed to fail? Leave your answer in the comments. If this video made you see this war in a different way, share it with someone who needs to understand what's really happening. And subscribe to the channel for more analyses like this. See you in the next video.